seems fair to me.
Yes, he did. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of 9PBS.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. And before this hour is over, we're going to talk to the head of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. He's Colin Wellenkamp, the executive director there, who, as we get more of these spring rains, we'll talk about how that affects cities and towns from Minnesota to Louisiana and how mayors are getting together to try and make things better, at least in terms of agriculture and manufacturing and tourism. So we'll talk about Old Man River, that is if the creek don't rise, before the hour is over. First, let's meet our panelists. Wendy is taking the week off, and so we meet Joe Holleman from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Also with us from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, I see a pattern here, Mr. Bill McClellan. Now we break the pattern. He's Ray Hartmann from the Riverfront Times, rawstory.com, and the Big 550 KTRS. And from the St. Louis American, as well as 590 AM and 97.1 FM. Or are you moving to KMOX? You just might be Alvin Reid.
I haven't officially been on KMOX yet, but I did update at the end of my column. I do have Dave Glover's show on KMOX. So there's your freebie. Right. Post got them, you got them, everybody's getting them, okay?
Fantastic. So now we have two representatives of KMOX and two with the Post-Dispatch for this program anyway. Okay, sorry, Ray, but we're going to start with you. Bill McClellan, I wondered how you felt the debate between Alderman Cara Spencer and Treasurer Tishaura Jones went this past week. I thought there were some interesting moments. I thought overall that Treasurer Jones seemed to be a little more in command. Some people said they didn't feel that way. But when Tishaura Jones said that she would not work with Jeff Rorta, who is the representative of the union, I thought, well, I'm not sure that's her call. I think unions get to pick their representatives, not management or municipalities. She also said that she was, thinking of going in another direction and not keeping John Hayden as the police chief for the city of St. Louis. As we all know, legislation has changed. It's very difficult, Bill, to get rid of police chiefs. So I wonder how that'll work out. Well, what were your impressions overall?
Well, I thought Tishaura Jones went in as the favorite, and I thought she did what a favorite has to do, and that's, maintain. And I thought she did pretty well. I thought her strength was when she talked about her relationship with other leaders in the region and the country. I thought her weakness was on public safety when she a couple times talked about it's a question of sending the right professional to the right job. The mantra for the people who want to send healthcare professionals out to scenes that police now go to, because as the police will tell you, you don't know until you get to the scene whether you can send a social worker or a cop. So I think it's kind of an easy way out to just say, we're going to send more social workers and fewer cops. But overall, I thought Tishaura Jones did what she had to do to maintain the lead.
Well, if we're taking for granted she has the lead, I think that they have so much more in common than they have apart that it's kind of hard to differentiate. I wished one would, and I guess maybe not like a late election cycle surprise, but I wish one would have, basically said like, hey, I do have a big plan for St. Louis. And I know it's hard to start without talking about crime in the city of St. Louis, but, just some real future foresight I thought was kind of missing. And as far as constituencies are concerned, I think Tishaura had to say that she has no use for Jeff Rorta, even though that's one of those calls where, like maybe she has to work with him. But as far as the debate purposes, I would have said, I won't work with him. I'm just going to try to force change.
Alvin, I thought you hit it on the head when the candidates had no big plans, no major stadium or bring an NBA team or revise the riverfront. It seems like right now in the city of St. Louis, we're putting out fires, even though what's amazing is that the next administration will get $500 million federal dollars. Nothing like this in the past. It's really incredible. I guess the mayor shares that duty with other members of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. I understand that, but there's nothing like it. Nothing like that we've ever seen.
Yeah, Charlie, I don't, as far as Tishaura saying that about Rorta, Lyda Crewson called for him to be fired 4 years ago, okay, very directly. So this isn't something new, and I don't think it's something that separates the candidate. I agree with Alvin. I mean, this is first of all, I do not think, I'm not sure what we base. I guess I can see Bill saying Tishaura is a front runner based on some numbers, but I think the real unknown in this election, which is just going to be an unknown, is the city of St. Louis has never in our lifetimes had a general election between two Democrats. Okay, in other words, in the April election has not had any meaning for decades and decades. And the X factor here is how people that don't like either of these two candidates are going to turn out and vote. And I don't think we know because we haven't seen it before. And I don't think, that's what I think.
No, I hear what you're saying, Ray, but I think Bill's onto something just by the fact that Tishaura Jones got, 10 or 11 more points in the primary, which means something. So I would think that she's the presumed front runner.
I'm not arguing that. I get that, but I'm just saying, and you're right, Bill. I mean, she certainly, if that's the measure, she certainly, I thought it was one of those many debates where you probably like the person in the debate that you like going into the debate. No.
But a couple of thoughts on the debate from a city resident. If you guys want to go ahead and listen to that. First of all, I agree with Ray that I think very few people, if anybody's minds, are ever changed by a debate unless someone absolutely implodes and just really messes up. And to Bill's point, Tishaura didn't do that. And because of her primary victory being the #1 vote getter, I think until some other poll says otherwise, you kind of have to look at her as the front runner. I do think, however, if you come into picking, because that's what these are reality show kind of things where at the end of the day, you vote who won. I believe that, like Bill said, Tishaura won in the sense that if she is the front runner, she didn't lose any ground. I think if you took two people who weren't acquainted with the city or acquainted with either candidate or their histories or their connections, I think Cara Spencer came out better, if only for the point that there actually were plans there. Mm-hmm. She actually alluded to having actual plans, where I think Tishaura stayed with the safer platitudes of we all have to work together and so on and so forth. So I think from that, that I would give Cara Spencer an edge. But then again, like I said, I don't think views get changed. I think people turn into debates to root for their candidate. But,
hey, Joe, since you are our representative from the city, 22% of your fellow residents voted in the primary. Is it your sense that there's more interest in the final election?
I think, well, not much more. I mean, there's not a lot of turnout for municipal elections, period. But I think there will be a lack of confusion. There'll be more people vaccinated. And as Ray said, it's actually a race this time in April. So we'll have, one would think, nicer weather, so on and so forth. So do I see the 22% being exceeded? Yes, I do. But still, if you get 1/3 of the city to come out and vote in a mayoral election, you're doing a good job. But I would hope it up, because I would love to see everybody vote, but we know that's not going to happen. I thought the other thing was I thought both of them would have been much more comfortable debating Reid, because looking at Alvin's point, I think they were all ready to be the progressive against the business as usual. And here you had two progressives, and there was no business as usual person to turn on. And I think both of them were probably figuring Reid might be their opponent, and they could draw these vast differences. And like Alvin said, they were trying to make themselves very different, and they only seemed to differ on a couple of points.
Well, here's the deal.
There's a sadness to it too, that I find myself wishing that these two women who are similar politically, seemed more friendly and like, I'll help you if you win, and instead I get the sense that these are people who don't like each other.
Well, and that's been, and in fairness, that's the dynamic that's real. You pick, obviously, that's not going to be something that's hidden. I think they both, and again, I'm obviously on their side politically. I think both would make good mayors. I think that the business as usual, who they run against, is what is perceived as the status quo in the city. I agree with Joe. I mean, there would have been a very different, well, there was a different dynamic. When Lewis was in the race, Cara Spencer and Lewis had it out in a debate. So,
Okay. Hey,
we'll see.
Here's the deal.
Maybe it'll be different.
The next debate is Monday night, and it's here on the 9 PBS, and in conjunction with the St. Louis Public Media, St. Louis Public Radio, as well as 5 on your side, KSDK. So that's right here, Monday the 30th. I hope everybody tunes in. Ray, I want to ask you about a couple of announcements by Republicans who are going to try and win the Senate seat that's currently held by Roy Blunt. Of course, the senior senator of Missouri is retiring, and so now the two Erics are in the race. Eric Greitens, former governor of the state of Missouri, and Eric Schmitt, who currently is the attorney general. What are your thoughts? I know it's early, but you write about this in this week's Riverfront Times. Who would have the advantage right now, Ray?
Well, first of all, it's interesting the two guys who were born just miles apart in St. Louis County, or grad school and miles apart in St. Louis County, are the choices right now. About a year apart. I think Greitens was born in '74 and Schmitt in '75. So they're very. That's about where the similarities end, I guess. Oh, no, excuse me. They also pander to Donald Trump, and they also are very different people than they were as recently as 2015, at least to the public. Because they seem kind of normal, and now it's a battle, kind of a race to the bottom to see who can be the Trumpiest. Certainly the big matchup is going to be between Eric Greitens and the rest of the Republican Party. Despite his fictitious narrative that George Soros and the left did him in, he was done in, I think, justifiably by the mainstream Republican Party, which he ran against and bullied once he got there. And so I think the big question in this race is how many other Republicans who are in the mainstream get in. If Ann Wagner, who's rumored to get in, or Jason Smith, the congressman from Southeast Missouri, if they get in the race, the more people that are mainstream Republicans, the better it is for Eric Greitens. He's got a very narrow lane. And we'll say one last thing. I do think that Eric Greitens is potentially the most beatable candidate by a Democrat. And I don't think it's 100% out of the question. But you could also be careful what you wish for, because if Eric Greitens were the nominee, you'd get about $1 billion of dark money coming in. So who knows?
Well, I wouldn't be getting any of that. So why do I care? Eric Greitens is going to run for Senate, and if the Republicans can't stand up against him, then it's on them. I don't really have very much nice to say about Josh Hawley and all, but at least he did say, like, looking back, I wouldn't change my position, which called for him to resign when he was governor. Now he could come by tomorrow and say, like, but that was then and this is now. But hey, what are you going to do, Republicans? It seems to me that you don't mind having people represent you that you wouldn't, leave your kids around. So, that's kind of on you,
Well, it's really odd. Here's Eric Schmitt, who sued China, and he's just done all these silly things. And yet, to me, he's heads and shoulders above Eric Greitens. If I had to have one of them as my senator, and then I think we will, I wish, Ray, that I thought the Democrats had a chance, but Missouri has just become such a bright red state that I can't see who the Democrats are going to put up that could beat anybody. So I'd rather see Eric Schmitt as senator.
Well, then I think one problem comes from when we talk about, he's tied himself to Trump. Donald Trump got 58% of the vote in the state of Missouri for president of the United States. So I think what some people in urban areas consider an insult, saying you're tied with Trump. I'm not sure the state thinks that.
Right.
So the idea that that's some negative might only exist in areas of St. Louis and Kansas City.
Oh, Joe, I wasn't saying it was an electoral.
With him being tied to it.
Joe, I wasn't saying, what's that?
I said the rest
saying
of
it
the
was an
state
electoral. I was talking about sort of a moral negative, not an electoral one. I think that's true. I talked to the other race about the X factor. We don't know where the Missouri's going to be with Trump because we'll see where Trump is 25 lawsuits from now, a year from now. We don't know.
Or he's going to pick one, and my guess is he's going to pick Greitens. Okay.
Oh yeah, I think. I don't know.
I just think that's the way it is. And Ray's right. Greitens is the most beatable because once he got the nomination,
I don't know, Alvin. Don't forget, Attorney General Schmitt was one of the attorney generals who filed with Texas to challenge the election results.
Oh, no.
So he might be in very good stead with Donald J. Trump at this point.
But Charlie, what I was going to say was, if there was any Republican candidate where some stuff could start like blowing up 24 hours after he got the nomination, it's Eric Greitens.
Well,
he's nominated, and now all of a sudden,
Charlie, no less an authority than Hugh Hewitt, who's a nationally known conservative radio host, described very clearly. He just annihilated Greitens. You want to Google an interview that's interesting, just a couple days ago, and he called him Todd Aiken 2.0. He said he's worried that he could be Todd Aiken because Eric Schmitt.
Okay, let's move on from this topic. Okay, we've got 2 years to talk about this, so we're good for now. How about you, Joe? We lost one of the greats in St. Louis sports history. Maybe not so much on the ice. He played 615 games for the Blues, but he really might have been number one in the hearts of Blues Nation. Bobby Plager died yesterday in a tragic auto accident on Highway 6440 at Van de Venner. You followed the Blues since you were a little guy. Tell us a thing or two about this man that we lost yesterday.
Well, I remember when the Blues, and especially when I was a kid back in 67 and 68, everybody all of a sudden, like overnight, starts playing street hockey with homemade goals and nets that you had to pick up and move every time a car would come down the street. And everybody had hockey sticks, and everybody was this guy or that guy. And everybody was either Red Berenson, because he scored the goals, or Bob Plager, because everybody liked him. And I thought over the years that it's sort of like the Yadier Molina, though that's even greater phenomenon. He may not have always been the best player on the field that we had, but he was always everybody's favorite. And that was Bob Plager. And a lot of it had to do with his enthusiasm to mix it up with players on the other team back when we were first all getting recognized to hockey, where you thought, you mean you can stop this game and just have a fight? We thought that would be neat in baseball and football too, and 10, 11 years old. And, and he just had that lovable cockiness of, that was his saying, number 5 in your program, number 1 in your heart. And I think that's what he was. And then he would be around, he was around and around. And it literally was, and having lost contact with hockey for a while, because I know some friends of mine are watching and they'll say, oh, you traitor, because I quit following hockey for a while. But when St. Louis won the Stanley Cup, the first thought in my mind was, oh man, I'm glad Bob Plager got to see it. It kind of just popped out of my mind. So that's where I tied him to the Blues. He was Mr. Blues.
He was really also Mr. St. Louis. He was very iconic. I already had a chance to meet him a couple of times, like so many other people. And I have the sense that for some reason, even if you didn't know him well, you felt like you lost a family member or a dear friend. And I was in the seats for those years, in the nosebleed seats when they were there the first year. And but I think Joe's got a really interesting point. Athletes say a lot of things, but I think when Bob Plager said it was as meaningful to him when they won the cup as if he'd been on the team, he meant it. He was that was, and you think of him and Barclay Plager, who was also, before he passed away, a very iconic part of the Blues history. It's hard to overstate how sad this is for Blues fans. It really is a tough thing.
Well put, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Alvin, let's switch topics and move to Washington University, where apparently since last summer, the students have been protesting the existence of sororities and fraternities on campus. Some calling them violent, some calling them misogynistic, others saying they're sexist or racist, and the number of pledges has decreased by about 50% or so, we read in the student newspaper and through St. Louis Public Radio. And I'm just wondering, do you think in 2021, at Washington University, where Harold Ramis was a member of the ZBT fraternity on Forsyth, and he later wrote Animal House, do you think that it's possible that the fraternities should go the way of the dodo bird?
Well, also throw in, typically St. Louis, he wanted to shoot the film in St. Louis at Washington University, and the powers that be wanted no part of anything like that script. So off it went to the University of Oregon. So wise decision. I'm in a fraternity, okay? And I will say we weren't into this binge drinking thing and all that. But it was a different experience. I'll just put it out there. The Hayes thing, oh yeah, it went on, okay? But I can't say that other students get to decide whether you have fraternities and sororities on your campus. Most men in fraternities don't get in trouble. Most women in sororities stay out of trouble, don't put themselves in danger, make lifelong acquaintances. I think that's just a complete and total overreaction. Now, if people don't want to join anymore, then that's fine. That's just up on the individual, the Panhellenic Council on each university as to how we attract students to, be involved. But for somebody else to say we don't want them on campus anymore, I disagree with that totally.
I think it depends on the fraternity and its history. I don't think I think I'm with Alvin. I don't think it should be a blanket thing. You look at, I don't know, the Betas, I think it is one that it depends on their history. I mean, the Betas have been kicked off of campus permanently at Illinois, Penn State, I think University of Central Florida. I mean, there's just a whole list of them. About every year, another substantial university is not just suspended them, but banning them. And I think that's fine if they want to make that decision, but I think it's got to be on a case-by-case basis. I was GDI, as we called it. I was not in a fraternity, but I think.
But okay, I understand that.
Some people are against their existence at all.
The thing is, they do good work. There is charity. Beth is a DG, and they're still raising money for blind kids, so that's good. And they do make a big campus smaller, and they provide fraternity and sorority. But at the same time, they tend to be pretty exclusive. Like you say, I want to join, and they may reject you or not ask you to be there. And is that really the collegial spirit? I know that there was probably a time when on college campuses, people really wanted to pair off with people who reflected themselves. But is that really where we are in 2021?
Yeah, it is, Charlie. Country clubs are exclusive, but does that mean that we should ban country clubs? I'm with Alvin. If kids want to join a fraternity, the rest of the campus shouldn't be so woke that they say, no, you can't do it. If they die a natural death, fine. My daughter was in a sorority, and it was nice for her to go through school and have a group of friends. My son wasn't in a fraternity, fine for him. But nobody is saying, well, you can't be exclusive. If you want to have a set of friends, you have them. Nobody can say you have to like everybody. That's crazy.
I think
it comes off the part, and I think Bill touched on it. It's a woke thing, pure and simple. And it comes down to, because what we identify now is something we don't like. So instead of not seeing that movie or not reading that book or not joining that club, we also want to ban that book or abolish that club. I would suggest that anyone who has any opposition to the fraternity, sorority way of life, and there are a number of them. I never joined. I never wanted to join one. But who was it to say that guy next to me or that gal next to me couldn't go join one? Feel free. Go right ahead. Make your own choices.
But Joe, let me throw this in. Joe, this is not a kind of like a new thing. When I was in college, campus, people hated fraternities and sororities. The difference is all this social media, and you're right. It gets a lot more coverage. But trust me, people had total disdain for the Panhellenic system.
Oh,
I've been told that myself. That
Alvin, so you know what? For you guys to make this like it's some new woke. First of all, I ain't woke, okay? But this is not a woke issue. This is not something you hear the woke fight. There's a lot of issues on campuses about free speech you could talk about. This isn't one of them. This isn't a big cause of the.
I think it is a woke.
It is a WashU.
You know, there was people 50 years ago that there was so much racism in Mizzou's in the fraternity system 50 years ago. Mizzou. That doesn't mean it exists today. And I don't.
Well,
they're alleging that it does. They're alleging that it does.
It does, but so what?
So what? There was no movement then or now.
Okay. Let's move on to one more woke topic before we get to Next Up. And for this one, we are going to go to who's next? Want to be fair here. Oh, we'll make it Bill McClellan. Bill, there is Senate Bill 26 in Jefferson City with 2 minutes to go. It's got 5 provisions, but 2 of them that might be of interest to our viewers is they're going to increase the penalties for protesters who block traffic and increase penalties for protesters who vandalize monuments. Are you for it or against it?
Well, I'm against it. I think we have enough rules already. And, and I've said on this show a number of times, I worry about people protesting on the highway in case an ambulance wants to get by. And I'm not one for defacing monuments. But we already have, people can be charged with it. And as long as the people understand that's what civil disobedience is about, you break the law, you get charged with it. I'm fine. I don't think we need to increase the penalties.
And we're about 7 weeks, I think it is, from now to the end of the legislative session. And we're at about the point where you have to start trying to sort out which bills are for political show. In this case, it's a red meat bill targeting Black Lives Matter, period, end of report. The question is whether they're serious about it or they're just scoring points with the base. And I guess we'll know more in 7 weeks about whether this is a serious one. I'm guessing it's
Ray,
not.
This could apply in the city if the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys or whatever they are show up.
This bill was written as an anti-Black Lives Matter bill.
But it would apply for the entire state.
They're not talking about it.
But Charlie, this is woke conservatism. Yeah, but it says woke like it's only this is some woke conservatism. Hey, we got to wake up,
All right. Hey, that's it for this edition of Donnybrook. But in a moment on Next Up, we're going to talk about our greatest natural resource, the Mississippi River, which flows, of course, right by the Arch. And we're going to talk to Colin Wellenkamp, who joins us from Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. And we'll get the latest on this beautiful river. And that's next.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of 9PBS.
Hey, thanks for joining us for Next Up. And on this edition, we're going to talk about the mighty Mississippi, which presumably is rising right now as a result of the rain that we're having in the greater St. Louis area. But wow, with all that snow in Colorado, will that mean that we have a more serious flood season than usual? Let's talk to Colin Wellenkamp, who's kind enough to join us. He's the executive director of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. Mr. Wellenkamp, thank you very much for joining us on 9PBS.
Thank you, Charlie, for having me. Really great to be here.
Well, with all that snow that was in Denver, do you think that we're going to have a pretty serious flood season along the Mississippi in 2021?
It does not look like it. The probability for our river basin to have major flooding is relatively low right now. That can always change as we get further into the spring and beginning of the summer. But as of now, all that snow that's in the Colorado River Basin, different basin. We won't be impacted by that. A lot of the snow that was up north has melted gradually, which is what we want. And the rains for spring so far are relatively normal. We were a little on the dry side, so it was welcomed water. But right now, things are moving along smoothly. we'll see if that stays the same way.
Alvin?
Colin, since I was, just a child, and so many St. Louisans like me, we would go down to the riverfront sometimes and just watch the river go by. And as we've grown older, the first thought, and people who visit here ask me this, and they say, like, why don't you do more with your riverfront, like right there by downtown St. Louis? Is the river itself a problem because of flooding, that it would be difficult to really, build up like an entertainment district or something down that way because the river is just too unpredictable and it's not controllable in this stretch right here by St. Louis?
So we have 100 mayors in our association, 100 cities in 10 states along all 2,500 miles of waterway through the middle of the continent. And we as mayors have sort of changed our entire paradigm and how we exist with the river over the last several years. For the last century, it's been more of, we're going to change the river to meet our needs as a society. Now that has moved away, and we are going to form our cities around the river instead of trying to form the river around our cities. This hasn't sunk in on all levels of society by any stretch of the imagination. This is a relatively recent paradigm shift. So I would say if you consider the river, the Mississippi, too unruly to exist next to, it really depends on how you view that resource. If you view it as a resource that needs to be changed to fit your needs, then yes, you're going to be gravely disappointed, especially in our new climatic reality. But if you are adaptive, innovative, and you view the river as an indispensable resource paramount to your existence and your draw as a community, and you're ready to form yourselves around what the river wants to do, then it's not too unruly to be next to. In fact, it's a gorgeous, beautiful, natural ecosystem and asset to have in our backyard.
Well, okay, what does that mean exactly? If I had $80 billion and I said, like, I'm going to turn the riverfront down by the arch where the river goes by St. Louis into an area that draws people and has restaurants and things like that, do they all have to be floatable to where they can rise and fall, or is it just not possible? I mean, I think we waste our riverfront. You tell me, how do we not waste our riverfront?
No, I would say that the solutions to riverfront development along the Mississippi River are not confined to our own jurisdiction. They are systemic throughout the corridor, and the river system needs to be managed at corridor scale instead of individual cities trying to manage it in their own backyards. We are trying to deploy thousands and thousands of acres of natural infrastructure along the whole corridor, Alvin, in order to make the river safer to be next to, because we are restoring the natural assets that used to be along it that would absorb and buffer our communities naturally against these disasters. All of that said, to answer your question specifically about St. Louis, it's a good idea to build out of floodplain, of course, up on bluff. And it is a good idea to make sure that whatever you are building into the riverfront is not exacerbating disaster vulnerability for anybody else, either on the other side or just downriver from you. Would I say that we waste our riverfront? I would say that our view of our riverfront is rather limited, and it needs to be a lot more expansive, and it needs to include a geography that's not just in front of the arch, but all the way up to 270, all the way down to Herculaneum, and across the river on the other side. That's a view that is, I would think, going to create plans for us that are much more rewarding and much more able to protect and sustain over time.
Right.
Colin, you talked about, and there were headlines this last round of flooding in Eureka, whatever, about the need to rethink river management. But didn't we have this conversation in Arnold and in Chesterfield Valley and in so many of these previous floods? It seems like after every big flood, there is this conversation that we need to rethink it. What is different about this time? Because this isn't the first flood we've had in recent memory, and they've all been devastating, and they've all prompted the same, I think, it seems like, that people talking about rethinking it.
Yes. So what's different now is the persistence of these disasters and the magnitude. We used to sustain a 200 to 500 year flood event, if you can think of it that way, in an earlier part of the century, maybe once every 50 years, which in itself is not quite right, but it was long enough in order for us to recover, move on, and not worry about the next one for another generation. Those days are gone. We're encountering record events now every 18 months, 18 to 24 months, or in 2019's perspective, it was a record event that never went away all year long. We had 271 consecutive days of flooding in 2019, a whole new national record ever recorded. And that was on the heels of the 2016 flood, the 2011 flood, the 2012 drought. It goes on and on back to 1993. So now these things are just getting so stacked up close together, and they are so very powerful that we cannot hope to have enough recovery period to ignore it. We have to change our entire approach to river management. It can no longer be lots of walls, lots of levees, lots of built implements to channel water down to the Gulf. We really need to look at natural storage, holding water naturally, creating natural assets that absorb these impacts over time. That's where we see our solutions coming from. And quite frankly, Ray, it's the only solutions we can afford. We can't afford a bunch of new infrastructure that we have to build and maintain and then rebuild. The natural stuff is great that we don't have to spend a bunch of money rebuilding it every time. And it has other amenities that come along with it: outdoor recreation, tourism, cleaner water, better quality of life. Those are all nice bottom line dollar value added.
Bill?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to Alvin's question. A friend and I took a little 21-foot boat from Minneapolis to St. Louis, and from St. Louis down to the Ohio. We took a left and went down to Mobile Bay, and through a lot of river systems. And so many river cities had, the river was a central part of their downtown, and they had marinas, and they had, is it possible for St. Louis to do more with its riverfront, or is, because of the flooding, is what we have about all we can have?
No, I think there's much more we can do with our riverfront. I mean, you look at the entire north side where the old power plant is, and places like that. And then you have south, right, where the southern side where River Des Peres feeds into the Mississippi, and then south of that where the Merrimack confluence is. I mean, we have some significantly dynamic geography that there's a lot of things we can do with, but we have to build in sustainable protections into that plan. It's really not going to be simple, Bill. It is going to require multilateral approaches that incorporate major green space, a lot of natural flood storage areas. One of the proposals that I've seen that I completely agree with is renaturing River Des Peres, ripping up all that concrete. This is what Philadelphia did to portions of the Delaware, ripping up a lot of that concrete and allowing and basically putting in a natural corridor again. Dubuque did the same thing. Dubuque, Iowa, they had a sort of River Des Peres that ran through the center of their city and met the Mississippi River. A century ago, they buried it. They didn't even put concrete. They made it into a pipe. Well, those pipes broke all the time, blowing up parts of the city. Well, they decided to just give it all back to a natural river. And what used to be the most undesirable, high-risk property in downtown Dubuque is now the most desirable, highest-priced property because they renatured that entire stream leading to the Mississippi River. So I think going in those directions, looking at those strategies, looking at what Philadelphia did to bring the Delaware River experience deeper into the city, and quite frankly, other Mississippi River cities are doing the same thing. Memphis has a plan. St. Paul is designing a new grand Mississippi River waterfront park that will be designed to take on water and absorb risk for the city so it doesn't go into streets. Davenport did this in the 90s. And I think if we pursue it in that regard, a lot more opportunities would open up for us.
Go.
I think because when you mentioned that you work in with 100 cities in 10 states, how difficult is it to keep the focus of 10 states worth and 100 cities worth of politicians on the clear problem, as opposed to this getting off into some debate over climate change? Sort of this philosophical to where, we want to stake out some philosophical side that we're not actually dealing with the problem. And you've got 100 cities in 10 states. That seems tough.
It actually is not as difficult as you may imagine, because when you're dealing with the mayoral level, Joe, it's a lot less ideology than you would if you were a member of Congress or a governor. It's very practical. It gets the politics sort of melt away in that regard, and it really gets down to the solutions. I'll give you an example. So one of our co-chairs, we have two mayors that are the top dogs in our association. The mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that's Mayor Sharon Weston Broom. Her city's celebrating 300 years this year. And Mayor Bob Gallagher of Bettendorf, Iowa. And two very different parts of the country, two very different cities. They work and get along great because, as Mayor Gallagher likes to put it, we set aside all the alarmist rhetoric around climate change. We don't get into that at all. We focus on the solutions. It's like Mayor Broom of Baton Rouge says, I'm not going to argue with you on the causes of climate change while my citizens go underwater. All right. I am simply going to solve this problem as mayor because that's what I've been elected to do. And that is really where the rubber meets the road with our mayors on these issues is the solutions and not the rhetoric.
Well, it seems to me, Colin, that if you don't take the overflow of the river, which seems to be greater and greater, and turn it into rivers like you recommend or lakes for tourism and recreational purposes, we'll probably have to buy out some cities and towns along the way, or at least replace their front streets and first streets and second streets. Am I right?
Yeah, adaptive management to the river to give it room to do what it needs to do, especially in these new climate impacts that we're experiencing is absolutely necessary. And you see cities doing that. Cape Girardeau has been building a large conservation area that was full of homes. They've moved everybody out, and now it is designed to flood. The same with Arnold and Kimmswick. All these cities are creating natural areas again to hand back over to the river. These are repetitive loss areas. Areas that typically do flood, and a bunch of homes would always go underwater. Grafton had the same thing. You have a number of federal efforts that overlay this, like a FEMA buyout program. But I think you're going to see more of that. But you're also going to see more adaptive approaches to building. So the new dock and the new port that's going into Kimmswick this year, which they already broke ground on, the whole facility is designed to go underwater. It's designed to flood, as is Beale Street Landing Convention Center in Memphis, also designed to be underwater. So these are things that are just by design allow the river to come and wash over them, and then there's not much mess on the other end. It's that kind of approach that I think is going to dictate the future for our cities.
Alvin.
Colin, you mentioned, a lot of towns, cities, mayors, projects. You didn't mention St. Louis. What is your relationship with City Hall in St. Louis? I know we're about to change mayors, but where is St. Louis in all this process?
Yeah, so we're headquartered here, and Mayor Francis Slay was one of our founding mayors back in 2012. So he was very much sold on this and wanted to see it happen, and was one of our first co-chairs. I'm from St. Louis, born and raised here, so this is my hometown. I think St. Louis has a number of opportunities for, as does both sides of the river, also East St. Louis, Illinois, Grafton, Alton, East Alton, all those communities. There's a number of opportunities to really improve on our relationship with the Mississippi River, but it really needs to come down to viewing the river as not something to control, but something to let in and really bring closer into the community experience as much as possible. We also, unlike a lot of my other cities, St. Louis has a very significant industrial footprint right next to downtown. I don't really have I don't have that in any other city except in between Baton Rouge and New Orleans area, all those chemical plants. So I think, working with the industries that are there to make their emissions a lot less noxious, a lot less noticeable, working with them to really limit their impacts and maybe even create some natural buffers between those facilities and the rest of the city is a good approach. Also, there is a lot of opportunity for disaster mitigation during in these confluence areas of the Illinois, the Des Peres River, and the Merrimack that I think St. Louis really should get a hold of. I'll tell you, Alvin, though, all fairness to our former mayor, our about to be former mayor, Mayor Cruzen, who's just about to check out. She had a fair amount of significant distractions that were also not nearly as acute. So the violent crime situation in St. Louis, I don't really have it as an acute that situation in my other cities, and so I understand how that could create some distraction. But I also think that the way we treat the river and the way that we can create a renaissance for a lot of these near water communities would actually help solve some of our other problems, like the violent crime, the unemployment, schools, these other, very loud problems that take up a lot of oxygen for St. Louis. I think that we could help those by tackling some of these other opportunities.
Okay.
Colin, I'm the guy that Joe was thinking about when he asked the question about climate change. No one would expect that your mayor should be focused on talking about the Keystone Pipeline or, fracking or something, or broader issues. But certainly climate change, which is, you use the word rhetoric, it is science. And is it not an important part of this discussion in terms of, and I'll be honest, flood management is way above my pay grade. But everything from, well, certainly the Trump administration, they were erasing mention of climate change, but whether it's the funding of the Corps of Engineers, the long-term strategy, can you really just sort of put climate change in a different compartment that doesn't have anything to do with the decisions that need to be made about the long term here?
We don't put it into a different compartment. We absolutely tackle it head on. But what we don't get bogged down in is, are humans to blame for all this? And well, we've got to sequester carbon just for sequestering carbon's sake. No, we approach these things with co-benefits. So it's great if we can sequester carbon and we can reduce GHG emissions, absolutely. But with those activities, has to come jobs, has to come training, has to come an expansion of other economies. There has to be a one-for-one trade-off here. There has to be other co-benefits that come with climate change, or what we call climate performance. So what, I got asked about 13 times by the press, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. What did we think of the Green New Deal? And we thought the Green New Deal was really not couched in reality for middle America, because any kind of climate agenda needs to have benefits that are sellable to our folk. And that means more jobs and more training for new jobs, but it also has to mean mitigation and adaptation opportunities. I'll give you an example. We just had our DC meeting at the beginning of this month, March 2nd through the 4th. It was virtual. We weren't actually there, but we talked to Senator Roy Blunt. We talked to Senator Klobuchar, Senator Durbin, Senator Tammy Duckworth. We're all on the agenda. And we told them, look, if President Biden is serious about making a climate agenda last longer than 2022, i.e. the next election where a Republican Congress can just come in and wipe it out, then he has to bring middle America along for the ride. What does that mean? That means fully funding things like the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, which just passed this year. It means passing our proposal for a new Safeguarding the Mississippi River Together Act, or we call the SMART Act, creating the Office of White House Chief Resilience Officer in the White House. And then finally, incentivizing natural infrastructure deployment through the highway bill, the farm bill, these other larger vehicles. We just signed an agreement with Ducks Unlimited on March 4th to deploy natural infrastructure up and down the Mississippi River for disaster mitigation and habitat, and also to sequester carbon. So these wetlands, forests, and riparian areas that we're going to put back, because we've lost 80% of them the last 100 years, they're going to suck up a lot of carbon. They're going to suck up a lot of GHG emissions. And that is a co-benefit for us, along with all this other stuff that we can sell. We can sell it to our city councils and we can sell it to our folk. And that's really what it comes down to.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Colin, the river, of course, is still a highway. And with shipping the big business, do we have an infrastructure problem with locks and dams, or are we okay there?
No, we're not okay. The locks and dam system is in a state of compromise, I would say. Before 2019, the price tag to bring all of our global commodity supply chain infrastructure up to a state of good repair along the entire Mississippi River was $12 billion. That was soup to nuts. $4 billion to keep it from failing, $12 billion to give us all new shiny stuff. After 2019, that price tag has jumped up to above $16 billion because of all the disasters we experienced that year, all that perpetual flooding. So, however, it's $16 billion to give us a new global commodity export system along the river. We generate $164 billion off of that activity annually. I'd say if I give you $16 and you give me $164 back, I'd say that's a pretty good deal for me. And that's really where we're coming on. And that $164 billion figure, Bill, is actually with all of the delays and closures that we experience today. If we don't have that anymore and we have all that reliability with no delays, then that $164 billion figure, well, it can go way up.
I agree that makes economic sense, but people tell me that our chances of getting the money to fix the locks and dams is a big uphill fight. Do you think we might do it?
I think we're closer now than we ever have been, because the Corps of Engineers.
He muted himself.
And our call came in. And now with this infrastructure package coming together, there's some planets aligning right now that have not been aligning over the past 8 to 10 years.
Good.
One of the big ones is earmarks. With earmarks coming back, earmarks used to be the grease that made the gears of Congress turn smoothly. It would allow members of Congress that absolutely couldn't stand each other and are diametrically opposed ideologically to come together on projects. I hate everything you stand for, but I'll support your project if you support my project. That's the beauty of earmarks. With those coming back, I think you're going to see this ability for Congress to get a lot more done. And we have a president that is, this is debatable.
Mr. Wellenkamp, we're going to have to hold you to that right there. The next time you join us, we'll talk about earmarks and more. Until then, thank you so much for joining us on Next Up, and we wish you the very best. Thanks for your time.
You bet. Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you next week, everybody, at the same time.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of 9 PBS.